Let's start with some of the good news. The political reception to Dr. Christine Ford, who's accusing Judge Kavanaugh of sexual assault when they were in high school, has been better in some measurable ways than the way that past accusers have been treated, something we've been covering tonight. For example, politicians in both parties have said that this accuser, Dr. Ford, should be heard. Chairman Grassley responded to this pressure, external or wherever it got him, by taking the unusual step of scheduling a new hearing. He didn't just stonewall, although there are criticisms about how the hearing will run. So that incremental progress is certainly worth noting as a factual matter. But it is not universal this week. There are people with platforms rushing already to impugn Dr. Ford, and we haven't even heard from her other than the interview with the Washington Post. There are people with megaphones in right-wing media who are suggesting without evidence that she's a political opportunist trying to smear Kavanaugh based on his judicial philosophy.
It's about abortion. Does anyone really believe the story would have surfaced if Brett Kavanaugh had pledged allegiance to Roe v. Wade? Of course it wouldn't have.
The timing, suffice it to say, is curious. This all has the whiff of a political smear masquerading as a sexual assault allegation.
We have reached peak lunacy on the left. And this is, by the way, the most disgusting thing that they have done yet. Any person that actually supports sexual assault victims should be speaking out against this, because this is absolutely, as I said before, disgusting, despicable behavior.
Disgusting, a word that sometimes comes up in projected criticism. Also, take a look at this former GOP operative who actually helped orchestrate the attacks on Clarence Thomas's accusers, writing that Kavanaugh's accuser must unfortunately expect this Anita Hill treatment from today's Republicans who will defend them at any cost. Now, we're already seeing some of the smear tactics at work. There are websites who peddled false claims saying that Ford, a college professor, was troubled, but the information for those pieces were based entirely on a different person, a different Christine Ford. But that was already amplified by the Drudge Report, as well as Fox News host Laura Ingraham, long before any corrections appeared. As I mentioned, we want to dig into this with an expert who has reported on many of these types of stories, New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg. Her new piece is titled, quote, "Boys Will Be Supreme Court Justices." And she says, based on her review, this accuser looks credible, but will it matter? I wonder, just big picture, how you feel and what you've concluded about whether there is improvement and what is still being done wrong as we look to adjudicate in public a difficult thing, the weight of this accusation and the facts against this judge and whether he should be promoted.
Well, I think there's certainly improvement. First of all, that there seems to be a broad consensus that these charges should be taken seriously and should be aired. A lot of the pushback in the right-wing media to Christine Blasey Ford coming forward has almost sort of assumed that what she was saying is probably correct, but basically said it hasn't been a big deal. So you see a lot of people saying, well, is it really fair to judge somebody for what they did in high school? You know, Ari Fleischer, a former George W. Bush press secretary, talking on Fox News about how, you know, can just like one little incident in high school really derail your opportunity to ascend to a Supreme Court seat or the presidency later in life, which is, you know, kind of rich coming from a party that has shown very, very little concern for juvenile offenders and whether they're ever able to expunge their record and kind of go on to redeem themselves and live productive lives. I mean, I think it's important to remember that the president called for the death penalty for 5 accused rapists, the Central Park 5, who were since proven innocent by DNA, but who were, you know, 14, 14, 15, 15, and 16. Now, all of a sudden, you know, this same sort of group of people is saying, well, come on, you can't really hold what somebody did at 17 against them. But the fact that I think you have a number of senators out there saying that if this is proven true, that would be disqualifying, it's progress of a sort, right? There might be a cynical interpretation, which is that there's no proving either way in a case like this. But I think that it's good that there is, at least on some level, a consensus that if he did this, it's serious.
Right. Well, and I'd like for you to peel back some of the double talk we're seeing as well, because this, like the Hill hearings, can be an inflection point. There is the possibility of learning, or what I might call learning under pressure. And so Senator Graham, who knows better, is saying things that regular people, random people might think sound suspicious, but are not, that you and I know are not, that he knows are not. For example, that Ms. Ford had a lawyer and a polygraph to try to improve her credibility. Now, Lindsey Graham was a military JAG lawyer, and he knows there is nothing wrong. Indeed, it is illegal and unconstitutional to hold it against someone that they retain a lawyer. And yet he says this. Take a look.
I don't know when she took the polygraph. I don't know who paid for it. I don't know when she hired a lawyer, and I don't know who paid for it. But if you didn't want to go public, why are you buying a polygraph and why are you hiring a lawyer? All those things will come out.
Of course, you're hiring a lawyer if you're getting anywhere near the hot zone that Anita Hill got to, and that doesn't speak to your veracity. Everyone has the right to lawyers, period. So I wonder if you could walk us through some of the senators who seem to be trying to have it both ways.
I mean, look, I think, Lindsey Graham is a weasel, right? He's trying to insinuate that her kind of elementary steps she took to defend against the onslaught that is now being directed at her in some way justifies this onslaught. And I mean, I don't think for a minute that the vast majority of Republicans in the Senate kind of really care one way or the other whether these charges are true. For them, the question is, will they still be able to vote for Kavanaugh without political repercussions when this whole circus is concluded? And they're trying to orchestrate it in a way that will let them do that.
Right. I also want to ask you about an attack ad I mentioned earlier in the show that's quite hard-hitting. It's not to present any kind of moral equivalence, because indeed viewers will recognize many of the claims of this ad have been highly supported, like the many investigations that showed Roy Moore credibly accused of preying on girls. Having said that, there is this type of attack coming out now. So take a look at this, a new ad against Judge Kavanaugh.
You can do anything. Grab him by the...
An admitted sexual abuser sits in the White House who supported an accused child predator for the Senate.
So get out and vote for Roy Moore.
Then he nominated this man to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Accusing Kavanaugh of sexual assault. When she tried to scream, she said he put his hand over her mouth.
We can't let Brett Kavanaugh decide on our rights for a generation. Enough is enough.
What do you think of that tack at this juncture in lumping Judge Kavanaugh together with those individuals as a way to defeat his nomination?
Well, first of all, I actually do think that there is some sort of, I don't know, moral implication in accepting a nomination from a president as disgraced and of such dubious legitimacy as this one. And I think that ad, do I think it's fair at this stage to compare Brett Kavanaugh to Roy Moore? Like, no, categorically no. I do want to say that I think that part of the deep and profound insult of this nomination is that you have this president who has boasted of sexual assault nominating this frat boy who has been accused with some credibility of attempted rape, and that is going to be the thing that ends Roe versus Wade, that kind of strips American women of their reproductive rights. In some ways, it just makes very plain the brute patriarchy, the sort of cruel power, the cruel imposition of male power over women's choices that this whole process represents.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.